Welcome, everyone, to Beers with Jesus, Todd's World. I'm Todd. Thanks for joining me today. I'm running solo today. My co host, Carrie, is on vacation this week, so she'll be back next week, and I'm excited to have her back. So I'm just going to run it solo today. Maybe we'll come in a little shorter. I don't know. We did a solo news, so if you haven't listened, go listen to the Wildly Talented News Hour. Dropped yesterday, primarily this week about Ukraine. I know we spent a fair amount of the prior weeks on Ukraine, and um, it's still in the news. It dominated the coverage that we talked about last week. So um, I want to. So I encourage you to go listen to it if you haven't. And then go find us too. We got a new book out. I got a brand new book out called 9 Mile Point. It's a novel. It's kind of a supernatural um, mystery, suspense, um, romance, horror, kind of all mashed together, and just a great story. I don't. I'm not one who is all hung up on making sure that my writing fits in these neat little boxes. So for me, this was the first book I ever wrote. I learned how to write with this book. I put it on the shelf for years. I mean, I started this book over 25 years ago. So it had been finished for a while. It'd been on the shelf for since the last major revision for at least 15 years. I pulled it off, did a little touch up, put it out there, and I'm telling you, it's one hell of a story. So you should go to Amazon and grab it. 9 Mile Point, Leaves the Blue Ways, my memoir, that's out there. Insurrection, Witness. I think we have 4 or 5 books right now on Amazon. So go to Todd Allen on Amazon, look those up. Get on our socials. We put clips out every week on X, on TikTok, on Facebook, on Instagram. I mean, pretty much all of them. YouTube. The full videos are on X and YouTube. The full video episodes every week. Go check them out. However you want to get them, send them and tell people about them. Maybe share them. Maybe tell some friends. Text them. Say, hey, you got to give this guy a shot. And yeah, well, the show's growing. We appreciate, absolutely love you guys. The fact that you tune in every week and listen and join us, I can't express how much it means to us to have you guys take time out of your day and away from all the different entertainment and news and political commentary type choices that you have, and to spend it with us. I appreciate it, and I hope that as the show continues to grow and it continues to get better, that this community that we're developing will only grow closer together as well. So anyway, thanks for joining me today, guys. It's my birthday too, so I'm even more excited today. Look at me go. Although it is dropping a little late today, so forgive me, guys. Generally, I have this recorded in the can. When I'm doing one solo, well, it took me a little longer to wrap my head around it. I don't usually play clips on Beers with Jesus. Clips is kind of what we do in Wildly Opinionated News Hour. And Carrie and I'll play clips and we'll comment on them and laugh at them and whatever. Sometimes it's educational, sometimes it's just sheer entertainment, whatever. The only reason I'm playing this clip today is because of what the passage, the story we're going to go to. We're going to put Mark on hold. We've been going through the Gospel of Mark, and we're coming up to Jesus' trial and crucifixion and resurrection, the Passion Week. Um, I'm going to save that for Carrie. She'll be back next week. We'll get back into Mark. This week, I'm going to go to an Old Testament story in Joshua. But I want to tell you kind of how I got to this idea. It's kind of a one-off, and the Oscars were the past weekend, and I don't watch the Oscars because I don't care. I don't care about any of them. I don't care what movies they're in. I don't care who wins actress of the year, actor of the year. I don't care about any of it. They're just all a bunch of, I don't know, whatever. I enjoy a good movie, but Hollywood's filled with degenerate pedophiles, so I just don't spend a lot of time on all that. Award shows aren't my thing anyway. I don't care about what awards. I don't care about them all like brown nosing each other and kissing each other's ass and whatever. Make a good movie, you know? And the people you'll know if it's popular, you'll know if people like it by whether it sells, by what kind of buzz it gets and everything else. It's the people watching the movie, it's the consumers that matter. Not a bunch of these assholes gathered together in Hollywood. Just that's how I think. Take that for what it's worth. I know some people enjoy watching them. This year, the uh, the film that won Best Picture was called Honora. I had no idea. I didn't even know this film existed. Had never heard of it. Paid no attention. Apparently, I still don't know much about what it's about. I certainly have never seen it. Apparently, it has something to do with prostitutes and sex workers and whatever. Again, I don't know. I have zero opinion on the movie because I've never seen it. I don't really even know any of the actors or actresses that are in it. So, but why this matters is that Honora, this movie, you know, a lot of people are saying it's just a bunch of porn, it's whatever, but this thing won Best Picture, Best Actress, Best Actor, all kinds of awards. And then during the awards, that's what we're going to listen to because I just think this is kind of interesting. During the awards, this is Megan Kelly's show, and she's going to play a couple clips of the Best Actor, Best Actress, their little speeches, and how they laud and praise and thank all the sex workers out there. So I just want, let's tune in. This is the only thing we're going to play today. Then we're going to get into it. It'll make sense, I promise, for Beers with Jesus, where we're going. So just give me a second. Here is Megan Kelly introducing a couple of these clips.
Oh yeah, you have to say sex worker. You're not allowed to say prostitute, and that's what I want to talk to you about. Like they all tried to elevate that, you know, that job, that choice as something kind of laudable. You know, like you have construction workers, and you have, you know, right, dairy workers, and you have sex workers. It's just like it's a choice. It's just a totally fine choice. Here is Sean Baker accepting Best Original Screenplay for that movie, Honora, Sat 3.
I want to thank the sex worker community. They have shared their stories. They have shared their life experience with me over the years.
He's quite a patron.
My deepest respect. Thank you. I share this with you. Okay.
And then here's Mikey Madison, who accepted the Best Actress Award for the same movie.
Savings you just can't beat.
What in the world? Why do I have an ad on here? Sorry, guys. I don't even know what just happened. Anyway, same thing. We're not going to go back to it. I don't know what's going on. Frickin' YouTube throwing ads in on me. Anyway, Mikey, whatever her name is, said the same thing. She wanted to thank all the sex workers out there. And so this got some play, of course, throughout the culture, throughout social media. And I'm not going to get into the moral ambiguities that they try to create out of prostitution and sex work, whatever. That isn't my point here today. My point is that I heard that, and then I heard people talking about it, and it got me thinking, and I started to think about sex workers in the Bible, because I mean it's the world's oldest profession, right? So, and when you talk about sex workers, prostitutes, harlots in the Bible, one name stands out above all the rest, and that name is Rahab. Just to give you an idea, she's mentioned at least two, maybe I think three times in the New Testament. Here's one of them in James 2, and we'll get back into this a little bit later, but I just want to tell you what the New Testament writers say about this sex worker who lived at the time just after Moses. So we're talking thousands and thousands of years before the New Testament was written. It was, and here's what it says in James 2:25. The same with Rahab, the Jericho harlot. Wasn't her action in hiding God's spies and helping them escape that seamless unity of believing and doing what counted with God. The very moment you separate body and spirit, you end up with a corpse. Separate faith and works, and you get the same thing, a corpse. So James is referencing Rahab, and to his Jewish audience at first church, first century, right after Christ, they all know the story. They all know who he's talking about. Some of you may not, which is why we're going to look at it today. Let's also go over to Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 11 is frequently called the Hall of Faith in the Bible. So not the Hall of Fame, but the Hall of Faith. Because I was going to say Paul. Paul probably didn't write Hebrews. We don't really know who wrote Hebrews. The author of Hebrews starts going down. And he begins chapter 11 with the fundamental fact of existence is that this trust in God, this faith, is the firm foundation under everything that makes life worth living. It's our handle on what we can't see. The act of faith is what distinguished our ancestors, set them above the crowd. And then the author goes on to list throughout the entire chapter a bunch of different Old Testament patriarchs and use them as examples of faith. He says, by faith, we see the world called into existence by God's word. What we see created by what we don't see. By an act of faith, Abel brought a better sacrifice to God than Cain. By faith, Noah built a ship in the middle of dry land. By an act of faith, Abraham said yes to God's call to travel to an unknown place that would become his home. So it's going through a bunch of different characters in the Old Testament and people. I don't mean to imply that I don't think they're real. They are real, but they're also in a story, so they're characters. And it goes through a bunch of them. One of the last ones is verse 31. So Hebrews 11:31. By an act of faith, Rahab, the Jericho harlot, the Jericho sex worker, welcomed the spies and escaped the destruction that came on those who refused to trust God. So the most famous, I think we could say, sex worker in the Bible. I suppose it's possible that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute or a harlot for a while. We don't know that. I don't think. I don't think that that's guaranteed. But the one that we know is Rahab the harlot. Thousands of years later, she's in the Hall of Faith. And still, her descriptor is Rahab the Jericho harlot. Like, what's going on with this sex worker? What did she do that was so amazing that how did she find her way into this faith that was so profound that she acted on it and found grace, found acceptance in God to the point that she's lauded twice in the New Testament? She's brought up as an example of amazing faith. And I thought, you know what? We got to read the story of Rahab. And that's what we're going to do today. So we're going to go all the way back to Joshua 2 and read the story of Ahab. Not Ahab. Rahab. Sorry, Ahab was a king. He was the king that Elijah was dealing with. Also, the ship captain in Moby Dick. But anyway, it's Rahab, not Ahab. Rahab, the Jericho harlot. Joshua 2. Joshua, give you guys, it's towards the front of the Bible. You've got Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and then Joshua. Genesis, of course, is creation, and then the patriarchs. You've got, the early stuff going on, Noah. Then you run into Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. That kind of covers all of the beginnings of the family of Israel, of God's chosen people. And that's Genesis. Exodus, you get into Moses. And 400 years has elapsed between the end of Genesis and the beginning of Exodus. And the Israelites are now slaves in Egypt. God sends Moses to be their deliverer and has all the plagues on Egypt. Pharaoh finally lets the people go. They get to the Red Sea. They got Pharaoh's army behind them because he's trying to get them back. They split the Red Sea. And the Israelites walk across on dry ground. Pharaoh's army tries to follow them, and once they get in the middle of the Red Sea, waters come crashing in and drowns and kills all of Pharaoh's army. And then Moses leads them to the promised land. They send some spies to the promised land, 12 different spies. They come back. Two of the spies, Joshua and Caleb, tell them all about this amazing, bountiful land which God has prepared for them. And then the other 10 are like, yeah, the fruit's amazing. All this flows with milk and honey. It's amazing. But there's giants in the land, and there's fierce people, and there's walled cities, and so this spirit of fear kind of goes through the people, and God says, listen, all right, you're going to wander in the desert for 40 years. That entire generation dies off, and now it's time for the next generation. But two of those hung on, Joshua and Caleb, and they were going to lead the people of Israel into the promised land, and that is what is happening right now, right at the beginning of Joshua. So we've got the handoff from Moses to Joshua. Joshua is now leading the people of Israel, and they're going to enter the promised land, and the first place they're going to go is Jericho. So let's read Joshua chapter 2. That gives you kind of a quick overview. So Joshua chapter 2, Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent out from Shittim 2 men as spies. I have to tell you, this quick break. When you grow up as a teenager and you're going to conservative Baptist Christian schools and conservative Baptist churches and youth groups and everything else, there's nothing in the world funnier or better than hearing your youth group leader or your pastor get up in front of church and say, shit 'em. It is just the funniest thing. And that's what I thought as soon as I saw this. I remember going back in time, being 14 years old, 13 years old, and just laughing my ass off in church because the pastor said, shit 'em. And the funniest thing about it to me is that nobody acknowledged it. My parents didn't acknowledge it. Everybody acts like the word shit isn't in there. So in there. Anyway, little aside. There's a lot of fun stories like that. If you get my memoir, Leaves That Blew Away, which I mentioned at the beginning of the show, it's available on Amazon. And I'm telling you, it's a great story. Stories all through it. You can get a lot of those kinds of stories. So anyway, shit 'em. Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent out from Shittim 2 men as spies. Go look over the land, check out Jericho. They left and arrived at the house of a harlot named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, we've just learned that men arrived tonight to spy out the land. They're from the people of Israel. The king of Jericho sent word to Rahab, bring out the men who came to you to stay the night in your house. They're spies. They've come to spy out the whole country. The woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, yes, 2 men did come to me, but I didn't know where they'd come from. At dark, when the gate was about to be shut, the men left, but I have no idea where they went. Hurry up, chase them. You can still catch them. She had actually taken them up on the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax that were spread out for her on the roof. So the men gave chase down the Jordan road toward the fords. As soon as they were gone, the gate was shut. Before the spies were down for the night, the woman came up to them on the roof and said, I know that God has given you the land. We're all afraid. Everyone in the country feels hopeless. We heard how God dried up the waters of the Red Sea before you when you left Egypt, and what he did to the 2 Amorite kings east of Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom you put under a holy curse and destroyed. We heard it, and our hearts sank. We all had the wind knocked out of us, and all because of you. You and God, your God, God of the heavens above, and God of the earth below. Now promise me, by God, I showed you mercy, now show my family mercy, and give me some tangible proof. A guarantee of life for my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, everyone connected with my family. Save our souls from death. Our lives for yours, said the men, But don't tell anyone our business. When God turns this land over to us, we'll do right by you in loyal mercy." She lowered them down out a window with a rope because her house was on the city wall to the outside. She told them, "Run for the hills so your pursuers won't find you. Hide out for 3 days and give your pursuers time to return. Then get on your way." The men told her, "In order to keep this oath you made us swear, here is what you must do. Hang this red rope out the window through which you let us down, and gather your entire family with you in your house, father, mother, brothers, and sisters. Anyone who goes out the doors of your house into the street and is killed, it's his own fault. We aren't responsible, but for everyone within the house, we take full responsibility. If anyone lays a hand on one of them, it's our fault. But if you tell anyone of our business here, the oath you made us swear is canceled. We're no longer responsible." She said, "If that's what you say, that's the way it is," and sent them off. They left, and she hung the red rope out the window. They headed for the hills and stayed there for 3 days until the pursuers had returned. The pursuers had looked high and low but found nothing. The men headed back. They came down out of the hills, crossed the river, and returned to Joshua, son of Nun, and reported all their experiences. They told Joshua, "Yes, God has given the whole country to us. Everybody there is in a state of panic because of us." There is Joshua chapter 2. And then in Joshua chapter 6, when they actually take the city of Jericho, there is another mention of Rahab. Where is it here? It says that the people of Israel put everything in the city of Jericho under the holy curse, killing man and woman, young and old, ox and sheep and donkey. Joshua ordered the 2 men who had spied out the land, "Enter the house of the harlot and rescue the woman and everyone connected with her, just as you promised her." So the young spies went in and brought out Rahab, her father, mother, and brothers, everyone connected with her. They got the whole family out and gave them a place outside the camp of Israel. But they burned down the city and everything in it, except for the gold and silver and the bronze and iron vessels. All that they put into the treasury of God's house. But Joshua let Rahab the harlot live, Rahab and her father's household and everyone connected to her. She is still alive and well in Israel because she hid the agents whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. Okay, that's the story of Rahab. Got it? Do we need anything else? I sometimes think that. I don't know about you guys, but I'm sitting in church and sometimes I think, you just read a chapter. I think we're good. I'm not sure that you're going to improve it any. I don't know if I'm going to, but we'll wander around it a little bit, explore it, see what we can find. So the story's a little weird. It's a little weird because what's taken from it, Joshua has his own place in the Hall of Faith in Hebrews 11, but twice, 3 times in the New Testament, Rahab the harlot is mentioned and she's lauded for her faith. She's an example of faith in action, essentially, is what she's praised for by the writers of the New Testament, by James and by the author of Hebrews. So, what was her great faith? I look at this story. There's a couple different ways you can kind of go about it. You could say, well, Joshua's sending spies back in. After 40 years ago, Joshua was one of the 2 spies, or one of the 12 spies, one of the 2 who gave a good report and said, "Let's go get the land, God's with us." And then the other 10 just scared the shitum out of the people of Israel, and then everything that happened. So Joshua's back. Caleb's back. We aren't talking about Caleb in this chapter, but they're both back. Joshua's back, and Joshua sends in spies again. What's interesting about this is that as you continue to read in Joshua, as you get to like Joshua, I think it's 5, that Joshua's sending them in. He's saying, check out the city of Jericho. They decided Jericho was going to be their first um, the first city that they try to conquer. And so Joshua, at this point, in chapter 5, actually, let's read it just to get a little bit of a. Where is it? Where is Joshua? Here it is. It's the end of Joshua 5, just before Joshua 6, where they actually go into Jericho. And then this, while Joshua was there near Jericho, he looked up and saw right in front of him a man standing, holding his drawn sword. Joshua stepped up to him and said, "Whose side are you on, ours or the enemy's?" He said, "Neither." God, how about that? Anyway, some things in the Bible are just great. He said, this angel says, "Neither. I'm not on your side or your enemy's side." What? I thought you were on our side. Are you a Republican or a Democrat? Neither. What? How could you not be a Republican? You know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. Neither. I am commander of God's army. I've just arrived. Joshua fell face to the ground and worshipped. He asked, "What orders does my master have for his servant?" And he tells him to take his sandals off his feet. And then he goes on to tell them to give him God's word to Elijah. He says, God spoke to Joshua in chapter 6. Look sharp now. I've already given you Jericho to you, along with its king and its elite forces. Here's what you are to do. March around the city, all your soldiers. Circle the city once. Repeat it for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry 7 ram's horn trumpets in front of the chest. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times. The priests blowing away on the trumpets. And then on a long blast on the ram's horn. When you hear that, all the people are to shout at the top of their lungs. The city walls will collapse at once. All the people are to enter, every man straight on in. So, what I find interesting about this is that there ends up being no purpose at all to Joshua sending these 2 spies to Jericho, at least when it comes to conquering the city of Jericho, because God's going to give the city of Jericho to the people of Israel. All they got to do is march around it for 6 days. And then on the 7th day, they march around it, bang on drums, blow on horns, blow on the ram's horn, and the walls are going to come down. And these were some massive walls. So God already had it set. He already had it planned. But back in chapter 2, Joshua didn't know that yet. Joshua knew Jericho was first up, but he didn't know how God was going to accomplish it. He only knew that God was going to. And so what does he do? He sends spies in. There could be a couple different things about that. My guess is that there's something of a redemption arc with the spies that went in originally with under Moses when he sent Joshua, Caleb, and the other 10. And this time Joshua seems to have learned from it. He only sends 2. 2 aren't as likely, I guess, to get afraid. But also, it didn't matter. I mean, nothing that these spies found out is going to have anything to do with how God is going to give Israel the victory over Jericho. So, what's the point of this chapter? Well, the fact that Rahab's mentioned twice in the New Testament as a pillar of faith tells me the entire point of Joshua 2 is Rahab the harlot. Rahab the Jericho sex worker. We stand in solidarity with our sex workers. But it's kind of wild, right? That out of this entire town, and this, it's Jericho's put under a holy curse. They're going to kill all of the inhabitants of Jericho. They're going to kill all their animals. There's reasons why God does this and commands them to do this. Largely, he doesn't want Israel getting caught up in the pagan gods and the pagan religions in worship of the Canaanites, the Jebusites, all the different people in the land where he's going to drive them out. And so there are times, and there's other things that are involved where God tells Joshua, listen, you can offer people peace and they can be your servants or whatever. Or if they refuse you, then you kill them all, whatever. Point is that Joshua sent these spies in. And why? Well, he didn't know yet what God was going to do. God hadn't revealed it to him yet. Yet he knew this was first up. So what lesson is there for us in that? Well, one lesson is that when we know what we have to do, at least to some extent, we know what God's given us to do, are yet we don't know exactly. God hasn't shown us exactly how to do it yet. Well, proceed according to your normal intelligence, intuition. This is kind of where Jesus tells us, be wise as serpent, harmless as doves. So what Joshua is doing is what any commander of an army at that time that was going to go in and try to conquer a city would do. He wants to get some eyes on it, see what's going on, get a feel for the defenses, get a feel for the walls, get a feel for what the mood of the people is inside the town, the whole thing. And so Joshua sends them back in. It's funny to me that that they go to Rahab the harlot. I mean, one could say, well, were they just engaging her services? I mean, we don't know. I guess it's possible. Doesn't say that they didn't. Um, my guess is that it appears from this passage like Rahab, for whatever reason, and I don't know why, but out of all the people of Jericho, Rahab the sex worker had a revelation from God, at least enough of a revelation that she knew something was coming. A lot of the cities, it seemed to know, but Rahab actually put it into action. My guess is that Rahab sought out these men, that somehow God had kind of given her some idea, some foretold, whatever, maybe in a dream, who knows, but that these men are coming. You need to find them and take care of them. And that's exactly what she does. So what you have in Rahab is Rahab is hearing about God. She's hearing about the people of God. She's hearing about Israel. Like the other inhabitants of Jericho, she's hearing about what happened with Egypt, with all these plagues. She's heard about the Red Sea, how God parted the sea. And mind you, they've been in the wilderness for 40 years. There've been all kinds of conquest and miracles and everything else, and all of this is starting to filter through. That wasn't the case right after God brings the Israelites out of Egypt and they cross the Red Sea and they're standing, they send in the 12 spies and they're standing at the border of the promised land. At that point, word hadn't had time in that culture. It's not like today where we have phones and everything's, the speed of light, everything, videos, everything. No, this was word of mouth. So it took a while to kind of filter through this entire land and all the inhabitants. But after 40 years, and then mind you, they're not that far away. They're wandering on the edge of this land and in the wilderness. And if you look at you picture them wandering for 40 years, they kind of went in circles. I mean, essentially, it wasn't to get them anywhere. I think that the purpose of the 40 years was to get Egypt out of Israel before God then moved them into the promised land. I think that was why they refused to go in 40 years earlier with Moses, is because there's too much Egypt in them. They just hadn't, they didn't know God well enough yet. And in fact, that whole generation dies out, and the generation that comes up, they know God. They've seen him work all through the wilderness. They've suffered for God. There's a passage, I can't remember where it's at. It says, after you've suffered a while, I'll establish you. And it was through the wilderness of suffering that God prepared the children of Israel for what he had for them in the promised land. But also, it had time to filter through. And God was never just concerned. It was never just a racial thing with Israel. It was all, in fact, even when they came out of Egypt, they had non-Jewish people that were attached to them. God always made provision for them, and it was always a remnant of Israel that was going to be saved, and they were always going to be saved by faith, and it was never just going to be Israel. It was always going to be opened up. God has one tree in Romans when Paul talks about God's planting this tree, and he's breaking off branches, and he's grafting branches in. God has this tree of salvation, and he was always going to bring more in. It was never just about Israel. Spiritual Israel has always been the church. That's always been where God was going. That godless country full of godless Jews over in the Middle East means nothing. Has nothing to do with biblical Israel. Has nothing to do with God. In fact, they hate God. So, I mean, whatever. They're our ally. I don't care. From a strictly secular standpoint, doesn't matter to me one way or the other. I don't care. But from a spiritual standpoint, they have nothing to do with anything, and they're never going to have anything to do with anything. So dispensationalists can put that in their pipe and smoke it. But anyway, it's a little. Maybe I should edit that out. See, Carrie's not here to kind of keep me under wraps. But anyway, so Rahab is who this chapter is about, and for whatever reason, God got a hold of Rahab, and Rahab listened. I mean, I think that's clear. She finds him, seeks him out, brings him in, and these guys, these two spies, they clearly weren't that good at being spies. I mean, the second they go in the town, the king knows that they're there, and he sends men looking for them. So this wasn't like the most effective intel operation. But that didn't matter because God already had them set up. In fact, it seems to be people all through my life in kind of conservative Baptist churches. There's always been this talk, and there was always this struggle with, should Rahab have lied? And we would always hear these stories. They would tell stories about the Jews in Nazi Germany. And the Nazis would come looking, and these Jews would be hidden under the floorboards and stuff, under trapdoors and whatever. And the stories that they would sometimes tell is how the soldiers would come, and they'd be like, do you have any Jews here? And, but in their German accent. I can't do the German accent. But anyway, do you have any Jews here? And the people, sometimes these are the stories we would hear. I don't know if they're true or not true, but this is the kind of things that we were told. And so people, the German people who were hiding Jews or whatever would be like, yes, they're under the kitchen table or whatever. And the soldiers would laugh and be like, you wouldn't tell us that, and they leave. And the whole idea behind all this was that you should never lie. Whatever you do, God is not for lying. God doesn't work through lying. He doesn't work through dishonesty. And so if Rahab would have said, yeah, they're right here up on the roof, they would have turned right around and left because God had a plan. Maybe. That's possible. That, to me, everything about that line of thought just seems a little crazy. I don't think that you could read the Bible and think that God doesn't at times use deception as much as he uses anything else in war and conflicts and whatever. So I don't think that Rahab did a single thing wrong here. And if the argument is, well, if it's okay for Rahab to lie, well, what about the guy who has an affair? Is it okay for him to lie? I think we know the difference. I don't think we have to pretend that we're that stupid just because we're Christians. Okay? So, yeah, if you're protecting some Jews, not that you're going to be protecting Jews anytime soon, but if for some reason you're protecting, I mean, in our country, you'd have to be probably protecting conservatives. They'd be hiding under the floorboards. Biden's henchmen are all looking for them. But I think it's fine to use deception as one of our tools. I think that God gave us that. And I know it says things like God hates a lying tongue and whatever, but clearly all of those are talking about interpersonal relationships. They're not talking about governmental kind of things. So, or war type times. It just doesn't make any sense. So I think it's fine what Rahab did. In fact, I think in the New Testament, over and over, it says that what Rahab did by hiding the spies was her act of faith. That was her salvation. That was her faith and works acting together to work for the children. So Rahab gets this idea, or somehow becomes aware of the one true God. How do we know that? Because she says, I know God has given you the land. Rahab didn't come from a culture. She came from a pagan culture that had all kinds of gods. It wasn't it wasn't a monotheistic culture. It was polytheistic. They had all kinds of gods. They'd make their own gods. They'd worship gods, whatever. But this was the idea of just this one all powerful God. That wasn't in their wheelhouse. That wasn't in their culture. So that only comes from her being exposed somehow to truth. Maybe these reports are coming in and the Spirit's starting to work on Rahab and say, and she's starting to get some understanding of the truth. And she says, I know that God has given you the land. We're all afraid. Everyone in the country feels hopeless. We've heard how God dried up the waters of the Red Sea before you when you left Egypt, and what he did to the two Amorite kings east of Jordan. We heard it and our hearts sank. We all had the wind knocked out of us, and all because of you. You and God. Your God, God of the heavens and God of the earth below. Now promise me by God, I showed you mercy, now show my family mercy. Who's she want a promise from? She wants a promise from God. She wants to serve God. Now she may be still somewhat limited in her understanding. I'm sure that she is of God and of all the revelations that he's given to Israel. But she knows enough. She knows enough to know there's a God, to know that a God made her, and she also knows enough to know that God cares for her. It says that in Hebrews. It says that those who would come to God must believe both that God exists and that he cares enough to respond to those who seek him. And clearly Rahab believed both. Clearly Rahab, the Jericho sex worker, we got to honor our sex workers. Jericho, the Jericho sex worker, he was the one, or she, not he, Rahab was the one that God decided to give a revelation of himself to. And Rahab receives it, takes it in, starts to process it, and Rahab believes. Rahab believes in Israel's God. And Rahab wants salvation. And she knows she has one route to salvation, and that's Israel's God. And I think that's awfully impressive for a pagan sex worker who has no background at all in monotheism or anything else. And yet the Spirit of God working on her and the things she's hearing, she responds to God. And she believes that if she does what she thinks God wants her to do, which is help these spies, which is make sure they're protected. Then she even gives them instructions. Listen, when you leave, go out to the fords, hide for 3 days, give them time to look around and come back, and then you should be safe and on your way. Like, she knows what her role is in this. But she also knows that she wants her family saved, and that the only way that's going to happen is if these men give her their guarantee, and their guarantee backed by God's word. And that's what Rahab is after. And that's that faith, I think, that we see in Rahab. That's that faith that so impressed James, and it so impresses the author of Hebrews. And I think it so impressed God. It so impressed Joshua. And Rahab goes on to live with the Israelites. Maybe she's naturalized. Who knows? I mean, there was a process within the law for that, for Gentiles to kind of convert into Judaism. So there's no reason to think that she didn't do that. I expect that she probably did. And so what we're watching here is this entire thing. Mind you, God isn't going to use anything that these spies learn. None of it matters at all in what God's about to do with giving Jericho over to the children of Israel. So everything about this is about Rahab. That's how much God cares about her, how much God is willing to respond to those who seek after him. Seek and you'll find. Knock and the door will be open. And everything you read in this passage of Rahab makes you think she's doing all of those things. Yet, she's still a harlot. She's still a sex worker. Probably it's a little much. I think we're left to assume that once Jericho's fallen and once she joins Israel, that she doesn't continue. She's not the Israel harlot, right? So I think it's reasonable to expect that once she made that transition, and once God saves her, once the people of Israel spare her and her family and everybody under her roof, just like they said they would, that then she's moved into the family of God, and I think probably moves out of sex work. At least I think we're left to assume that, and it seems to make good sense to me that she would. God certainly, I don't think, approves of sex work. But that's one thing. And that's the thing where we can all get real up on our high horses if we've never charged for sex, or maybe if we've never paid for sex. And we can be like, why would God have anything to do with it? Out of all the people at Jericho, he couldn't find a better person. It just shows you that God doesn't think like we do. God doesn't look at people like we look at people. God looked at Rahab, and God saw a woman of faith whose faith was going to be recognized thousands of years later, down through the millennia. And the church that he founds after his sacrificial death on the cross, and after he rises and he ascends, and this church is growing, Rahab's going to be one of the ones that they lay down as, go back and look at her life. Look at what she did. Look at how she merged. Look at how she merged faith and works together. Look at how she worked out her faith by hiding the spies, by lying to the people of Jerusalem, by being so concerned about salvation and her family's salvation, she's willing to do anything she can to help out Israel and to be on the side of God. And I think that's what God's trying to show us. Like, we have to respond to the light that we've been given, right? And we can't look at somebody and think just because they're a sex worker, well, God doesn't have much use for them. I think they're soiled. They're a little dirty. They aren't. God's not going to be able to use them in the church like He's going to be able to use someone who's grown up in the church and waited until they were married to have sex. He'd never been a sex worker, that much we know. Isn't it funny that Rahab the harlot looks a lot more like the kind of people that Jesus came for as we've walked through the book of Mark than a lot of the rest of Israel at the time? It's exactly who Jesus came for. Broken people. I don't think Rahab was happy in her. I don't think she was content and satisfied in her sex work. And I think that God freed her from that and freed her into whatever else. But one thing this chick had was faith. One thing she knew, she saw God. She began to hear about God. She begins to seek God. And the more she hears, the more she seeks, the more she's looking. And then God gives her this full revelation. And then He sends her these two spies. And the entire point of this is for Rahab's salvation. And Rahab has to put her faith into works, and then God takes it from there, and God saves her and her family. And I just think it's a great story. And it ends pretty cool. Let's go to Matthew. This is just, those genealogies everybody talks about that everybody gets so annoyed by. And this is, the old King James, it was like, and such begat such and such begat such and such. Well, this is one of those things. And what it is it's giving us the line of Christ. It's the lineage of Christ through Joseph. And what we're going to see in Matthew 1, verse, 3, 4, something like that. It's going through, it says, the family tree of Jesus Christ, David's son, Abraham's son. Abraham had Isaac. Isaac had Jacob. Jacob had Judah. So he's starting to go through things here. And then it says, Salmon had Boaz. His mother was Rahab. The Jericho harlot was in the line of Christ. Come on. Where else does that happen? Where else does He take broken people and turn them into something beautiful, something amazing by working through their faith and working through the revelation that He's given them, and they start seeking more and He starts showing more. And then this person becomes a paragon, a hero of faith thousands and thousands of years later. I mean, that's what this is all about. That's what the Bible's all about. That's what Jesus came for, all of it. People just like Rahab, the sex workers out there. Now listen, I don't think as a culture we need to celebrate sex workers. That wasn't the point of that clip. Clearly, that's what we're doing. But it doesn't, just because you're a sex worker, just because you've had an OnlyFans account, whatever it is, all the different things, and that's just dealing with a harlot. And there's all kinds of things we could get into. But nothing from your past is going to prevent you from walking into all that Jesus has for you. It's just not. There's nothing you've done that's going to disqualify you. There's nothing you've done that Jesus looks at and he's like, I can deal with a lot. You know, I mean, I died on the cross. I covered a lot of sins, but man, that's a rough one. I don't think that's not how it works. He came to call us to repentance, and it's so clear all through Joshua 2 that Rahab personified faith and repentance and sincerity. And then she goes on to be mentioned 3 separate times in the New Testament, and one of them is in the line of Christ. One of them is Rahab, the Jericho harlot, is the great grandmother of Jesus. Come on. The Bible's so awesome. I just love it. I love the story. I love all of it. So anyway, I told you it's going to be a little shorter this week. I hope it is. I never actually know until I finish. I know that sounds strange. I have a timer up here, but I don't really pay attention to it. So anyway, there's my solo beers with Jesus. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. Carrie will be back with me next week. Check the socials out. Share us with people, with friends, family, whatever. And thanks for joining me today. Hop onto Amazon, buy some books. Go to toddsworld.net. We got some great merch. But I hope you take from this that not only does nothing in your past prevent God from using you for anything he's desired for you to do, there's no ceiling to it. Like, God washes out our past. Our past is clean it's white as snow. God only uses broken people. That's so clear all the way through. Look at what we just learned about Peter when he denies Christ, and then he says, "But when you come back, Peter, because you're gonna stray, you're gonna fall, but you're coming back. When you come back, take care of your brothers." Rahab, take care of those spies. And then when you're done taking care of those spies, take care of your family. They're all going to find salvation through you. And then move in, join Israel, and learn to love God even more. Learn to walk into all that he has for you. And I sometimes wonder, like, how respected must an older Rahab have grown to be? I don't know. It's pretty cool to think about. Pretty amazing to think about what God can do with our lives, no matter how broken they are, no matter what we're involved with, no matter what, if we'll just give it to him and say, I don't feel like there's much here for you to use, but use whatever you can, because it's all yours. That's what Rahab did. She ends up a pillar of faith. All right, guys. Thanks for joining me today. We'll be back next week, back in Mark with Carrie. Thanks for joining me today. We'll catch you next week.